Hi everyone, this is Jamie, and welcome to another episode of the Yogi Within podcast. Okay, so on today's episode, um, this is either going to be two individual podcasts, and I'll record half of this today, or it will be a much longer one. I'll see how I go just in terms of time and energy, just because the two topics I wanted to talk about, they overlap in lots of ways, and yeah, energy wise I'll see how I go with talking about this. Otherwise it might be two episodes. So let's start with the first topic today. I was going to call this around commitment to the spiritual path or practices that we have. But actually, after some experiences that I had over Christmas, I think I'm going to talk about attraction in different ways. And this is going to be very much related to the subtle body. So really, this is almost a continuation of my philosophy on Bandha and the subtle body in terms of attraction. And also really about the kinds of people that we meet on the spiritual path. And if we're living in accordance with our intuition and we're allowing that to guide us through life, it's a very different way of looking at the types of people that we're attracted to and the types of people that we're drawn to. And really, what do we learn from those experiences? And especially when it comes to romantic relationships, what makes us drawn to certain types of people. And I'm going to talk about this from an energetic level, from the subtle body, and what I've learned from my yogic practices, and also an experience that I went into quite deeply over the Christmas period. So, what makes us attracted to people? I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of a man being attracted to women. And that's been my experience through life. And I've looked at the different people I've been attracted to and drawn to over the years, and especially in the last 5 to 10 years, because I think this has been more important in terms of where my mindset has been, especially with the involvement of my yoga practices, which has really allowed me to choose things much more from an intuitive state. And I think really the yogic practices allow us to do that and encourage us to do that. There's lots of reasons why we're drawn to different people. Where beauty is one thing, yeah? This is a lovely thing to observe. I very much appreciate beauty. It's very much a pleasant thing to be drawn to a beautiful woman, to see a woman with a beautiful face and beautiful eyes. And, this is something we should appreciate in life. I appreciate beauty, and we all appreciate beauty in different ways. But I think when I think about things from a spiritual practice and from the context of looking at why we might be drawn to different people on an energetic level, to me, this is completely intuitive. And I would say that societally, I think people are becoming less intuitive. And I think that really attraction is still very strong, and it's still an instinctive, intuitive thing that everybody can experience, that everyone can relate to this. If you are of a clear mind, it's very different experience to be intuitively attracted to someone where, let's phrase this correctly. When you fall in love and when you meet someone, I've talked about this on previous episodes, there's no mind involved. Yeah. Sometimes when we meet people, it's got nothing to do with the mind. Yeah. There's no assessment of what job they do. There's no assessment of their background financially or any other association we might have with the mind. where we're in some sort of analytical judgment, critical view. Some of us, sometimes when we meet people, it is completely intuitive. It's as if we're not in control, yeah. And I would say that we're not. When we are drawn to someone, when we have that attraction to someone, there's no mind involved. It's a completely instinctive, intuitive thing. It's almost like you're in someone's gravitational field. You're drawn to them. There's a desire to be close to them, to touch them, to be near them. And it's beyond the mind. It's just a feeling you have, yeah? There's many reasons why this might be the case. And I think on a surface level, we would assume that, we're just physically attracted to someone. That's what we might describe this as, that, it's a bodily thing and we're just attracted to someone. I believe it's actually much deeper than that for some of us, because I've experienced this at different levels. Sometimes we meet people and it makes no sense. Yeah? There's no logical reason as to why you might be attracted to this person, but there's something about them that you are fascinated by, obsessed with. You can't keep them out of your thoughts. It's just there all the time. Your subconscious is screaming at you at some level to tell you to go closer to that person. It's something you can't ignore. I've talked about this before with, the senses in terms of water, sleep, food, and sex, but really, this is something beyond that. I think it's something at a much deeper level that goes beyond those instinctive needs. I think when you meditate on that and you go into an embodied state and you think about that at a very deep level, there's something else that's drawing you together. There's something else that is pulling you towards that person that you can't really explain, but you can't ignore it. You might try to ignore it. You might try to stop it, but really you're going against your innate desire and your innate need to be close to someone. And this is what I've always enjoyed about Tantric Buddhism, is that we don't repress anything. Yeah, this is a fundamental thing we shouldn't do in our life, is to repress what is actually naturally there. We need to acknowledge these things so that, we understand ourselves at a deeper level. Now, let's think about this in terms of how we might view this from a spiritual perspective. In Buddhism, we have the concept of dakas and dakinis. Now, there's lots of different ways to view this, but my interpretation of this is that we have female and male embodiments of teachers in some essence. Yeah. Sometimes we meet people in the physical world that represent something that we need to learn. Yeah. And I believe this to be true, and this has been my experience of life. The concept of dakas and dakinis, which are, these could be drawn and visually represented in Tibetan art, for example. And these look like, female figures or male figures. But these can also be conceptual. These can also be something on an energetic level, or something within your dreams or different states of consciousness. But I'm going to talk about this today from the physical level, like the people that we meet. And we could say that on your journey, you might meet what we might call a daka or a dakini as someone that's going to teach you something, yeah? I think it's always good to think about relationships, especially romantic relationships, in terms of what we learn from those encounters and what we learn about ourselves from those encounters, especially ones where we're triggered. Now, most of us will probably agree with this, that it's quite likely the romantic encounters you have will potentially trigger you the most, yeah? Someone you're in love with, or you have that kind of relationship with, is quite likely to trigger you the most, in the sense that they might bring something out in you that wasn't really observable before, where it wasn't known to you and you weren't aware of it. And then you have a strong reaction Something else I've always enjoyed about Tantric Buddhism is that these are opportunity for change. Yeah, these potentially are a chance to convert a negative energy into a positive energy, and I want you to keep that in mind. This is going to be a core theme throughout this talk around opposites, around positive and negative energy. Dakas and Daikinis, in the Buddhist sense, are teachers. Yeah, I love hearing very old stories from Tibet and Nepal and northern India around different lamas and different spiritual teachers, different siddhas, their stories into spirituality and what was their path like. You know, what was it that drew them into these paths, and who did they meet on the way that it brought them to a state of bliss or enlightenment, or just, you know, feeling more calm. And in Tantric Buddhism, the non-monastic practitioners, you know, they lots of them renounced their monastic vows because they realized that to go deeper into their spiritual practice, they needed to have a female consort or a female partner, because I believe that they were aware that engaging with the opposite sex or engaging with a female or a male partner is what was going to take them deeper. And this has been my experience. This is why I'm not a monastic spiritual practitioner. One, I don't want to deny my innate desires and repress those, which is why I would call myself a yogi in that sense. But also because I'm very aware that engaging in practices with a female consort or a female practitioner 100%, million percent enables me to go deeper into myself, and it takes me to deeper parts of my meditation and yogic practices, because I believe that the wisdom that women have, I'm talking from the perspective of a heterosexual man, so my opposite, there is an opposite energy that you create together. There's something that you trigger within each other that allows you to see something from the opposite perspective, and it allows you energetically to reach a higher state. It enables you to reach higher forms of love and bliss. I've talked about that on previous episodes, so I won't go too much more into that. But I believe it's a vehicle. Those types of encounters and relationships with dakas or daikinis, or you could just think about this in terms of romantic partners, depending on your sexual preference. Your opposite, think about it in opposites. They enable you to see things in a different way. There's that opposite energy that they hold that enable you to do that. And there's lots of wonderful stories within Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana and other forms of Eastern esoteric practices where this was well known. Yeah, this was well known that most siddhas and lamas who were non-monastic had a female consort, had a spiritual partner, not just a sexual partner, not just someone you're attracted to, but someone who was on your same level spiritually. Yeah, a female partner on the same level as you spiritually, that triggered you, that enabled you to see things in a different way. And I think really that's what happens. We get triggered. We could go into attachment styles, and I think that from a psychotherapist perspective, that has some relevance. There's definitely some patterns that we have where we're, you know, drawn to potentially the same types of people. I think that changes depending on how you live your life. But I'm thinking about this from an opposite, yeah, your opposite, someone that has an opposite energy to what you have. And I think at times attraction is the need to balance an opposite energy. This is again going back to the philosophy on Bandha. If you think about this from a non-physical perspective, take out the physical attraction, take out the beauty, take out what you see on a physical level, and go deeper. And this is what I've largely meditated on, and specifically actually quite deeply over Christmas, because that sense of attraction and that sense of love is such a powerful energy, and it's magnetic. It's so strong, and it's a lovely feeling, yeah, to have that desire and that will to want to engage and be in union with another person, and that cultivates this deep sense of love and bliss. That love and bliss is the best vehicle there is to take you into deeper states of meditation. I think this is why Buddhism focuses on it so much, because really it is the only vehicle that can take you into these deeper places. Love beats everything. Compassion beats everything. Anger, resentment, these don't take you anywhere. Yeah, that takes you down. It's a negative energy. Yeah, it holds you back. Love, desire, and compassion, it raises your vibration. It takes you up. It takes you into these deeper states of consciousness. Which is why siddhas, lamas, monks, this is why these practices are mostly about cultivating that energy, because they're very much aware of this. And I believe that having a female partner or an opposite enables you to practice that more deeply. And that's what these old stories are really about having female consorts, which, back then was mostly male practitioners, and enabling each other to go into these deeper states. Now, let's stay with the theme of opposites, yeah? And again, this is related to Bandha. Now, let's pause a moment. Why I went into this is because I was really focusing on cultivating this feeling over the Christmas period. I had some time off, a little bit of time off, and my meditation practices were hugely focused on raising that feeling, that love energy feeling, and focusing on desire as a way to cultivate that feeling. What I noticed from going into that very deeply over the Christmas period is the opposite came out at the same time. And I think this is natural, because to really be in a very heightened love state, you have to be vulnerable. There has to be this openness. That openness is another vehicle to take you deeper into states of love. Now, all of us experience that at different periods, and I think a lot of us experience that, unfortunately, quite briefly. My goal is to try and experience that as much as possible for a long period of time. But it's very challenging, because vulnerability potentially is a very uncomfortable place. You have to have a very strong mind, and you have to have a certain way of looking at things to stay in a vulnerable state and to stay in a love state where potentially you're attracted to someone and you can stay in that state. What will happen, in my experience, is the opposite feeling can rear its head, and that can be lots of things for some of us. It can bring up different types of fear. It can bring up different types of anxiety. Potentially, we might feel the sensations of jealousy or anger. And this is because being vulnerable it exposes ourselves, yeah? We're exposed when we're vulnerable. When we're exposed, all of the masks are off, the mind is not involved. I have this analogy, your chest is laid bare, you're exposed, your center, the middle of you is open, and you're allowing someone else in, yeah? You're allowing that opposite energy into you. You're not closed, yeah? I'm very visual when I think about this. You're allowing that opposite to see you, and you're allowing yourself to be seen, yeah? You're allowing them to see you and you to see the other person. You're exposed. That person can potentially hurt you, yeah? Because you're allowing yourself to be open and vulnerable in that way. And I do believe that to be truly in a deep love state, you have to practice vulnerability. And most of us, I believe, when we experience that, we get scared and it gets closed, and that love energy drops down. We don't feel the same thing because the mind gets involved. We start creating stories and bring in things from the past where we're reminded of something that hurt us. So we start thinking in a critical way, an analytical way, and we start to get a little bit beady-eyed, and we start to close down. And I think that's why lots of us, we want that feeling of love. We want that openness, but because of fear and the feeling of hurt and wanting to protect ourselves, we close that channel, to that opposite energy that was there, gets closed, and then it dissipates. And then we fall out of a love state, and then we're much more in our mind. Love and that feeling of vulnerability in love has got nothing to do with the mind. When you really love someone and you're in that love state, there's no criticism or judgment. You're seeing them in a pure form. I think about this in terms of purity. It's light. It's just you're seeing someone in a way, I would say, as they truly are. And they see you as you truly are. And there's something about seeing each other in this bare, true state that raises the love vibration to this crazy high level. When the mind gets involved, it shuts that down, and it dissipates it. The mind gets involved and it starts to be critical and analytical, and then that love state dies. Now, what are we attracted to? What are we drawn to? Let's say the goal is to reach that love state. That love state is the clear state, this clear light, this luminous state. That person in some way encompasses your opposite, which is why I think we're magnetically drawn to people in this way. When you think about opposite charges, I'm going to do a bit of basic physics. Two opposite charges are drawn to each other. This is the nature of the universe when we think about a positive charge and a negative charge. They're drawn together. They don't repel each other. Opposites are drawn to each other. This is measurable in the known universe, which is why we think about things in that way. We think about positive energy in terms of matter or antimatter and light, and we think about negative energy in terms of gravitational forces, and they cancel each other out at some level. I'll go into that a little bit later. But as these energetic forces are drawn to each other, as we are drawn to each other, something happens when these opposites come together. Depending on the type of energy that we measure in the known universe, different things happen. But often, that energy leads to a stabilization, some kind of energy release, and it becomes more balanced. Those opposite energies create a more balanced, stable connection. And sometimes it's also released. Now, we feel this, Again, depending on what types of energy in physics you're measuring, different things will happen. But generally, a lower state is, a lower potential energy state is created or brought together, a stabilization or a release. So let's just think about that for a moment. We are, in my mind, a representation of everything else there is in the known universe. In this empty space is this popping of different types of energy. We can't see it. I'm going to go into that a little bit later, actually. This is going to refer back to the concept of shunyata in Buddhism. So let's stay with this, actually. So these opposite energies come together and this stabilization is created. I believe on an energetic level, this is also why we're drawn to people. At some level within our subtle body, we see this opposite in someone else. There's this magnetic draw towards someone else. There's this need for stabilization. There's this need for the opposites to come close to each other. This is why I believe we can't ignore these things. There's something intrinsically within us on an energetic level that is pulling us towards someone. We don't understand it with our mind. We feel it, and our subconscious is screaming at us and giving us pictures and images and feelings within our body, our gut, our heart, that draw us towards that other person, We can either ignore that or we can intuitively allow that to happen. And I think when we intuitively allow that to happen, we're happier because we're allowing our body and our intuition to guide us, It's a non-mind thing. And then a stabilization is found. And I think lots of us feel that in our romantic relationships. There's a calmness. This is often said term of being whole. People describe this in love language of becoming whole or finding your other half. These are words that are often used in poetry and music, which is the best way to express intuition. It's very difficult to express things just in written language, but poetry and music and art definitely is the best way to express things like love and the subtle body. And this is what happens, I believe, is that you are whole again in some sense. I believe on an energetic level, something in you feels whole. Your opposite is now bound. You've allowed that stabilization to occur through the meeting of your opposite energy. I also believe that you can do this on your own. And I think this is what Buddhist practices or yogic practices enable you to do. It enables you to see your opposite energy. Through yogic practices, we're able to bring awareness to that opposite, and we're able to cultivate that opposite energy through breath work, meditation, yogic practices, so that we generate that feeling ourselves. We generate that opposite energy and we feel that stabilization, which is why we feel calmer and more centered. We feel whole. Often we find that in other people. I don't think it's wrong, but I think it's also why we have attachment, because we're attached to that opposite energy. We're attached to that stabilization that we get from our romantic relationships, which, are our teachers. Our dakas and dakinis are manifestations of that opposite energy. They're manifestations of what we desire to be close to. They're manifestations of what intrinsically on an energetic level we're looking for to feel stable. If we are focusing just on one end of the spectrum, there's always this need and desire for opposites to be drawn together. And I believe that I never set out to try to be a Buddhist. I'm not a Buddhist. I believe that Buddhism is the best explanation for reality. And I think that when you meditate on this and you go into this, it's observable and it's felt. This is a felt experience that is understandable, not just in the mind, but you feel it. You observe that that's happening. You observe that you do feel whole in that sense. Your partner is giving you that opposite. You are drawn to each other and creating that stabilization. I believe this also happens emotionally. Feelings have an energetic quality. Anger has an energy. Anger is a vehicle to bring awareness to a sense of pain or hurt. It's opposite. Let's try to describe this in the sense that things have weight. Things in our known universe are measurable in terms of weight. I believe emotions have weight. Different emotions have a certain type of weight and a different type of energy. Think about it from a physics perspective again. When opposites come together, some types of energy that we measure not just stabilize, but they release. There's an energetic release of the coming together of these opposites. And I think this is what happens when we bring awareness to our emotions. We've all felt this, You have this certain feeling of anger, potentially. And it's very strong, and you feel unstable, Your meditation practice, your yogic practices, when you go into those things through the mind or language or meditation or whatever you might choose, that brings awareness to that feeling. What usually enables it to be cancelled out or released is bringing awareness to its opposite. The opposite of anger is compassion and love, because you're bringing awareness to what the core of it, the root of it is. The vehicle is anger. Anger is bringing it to the surface. But really underneath all that is a sense of feeling of hurt or pain. When awareness is brought to that, it's cancelled out. We've all felt that when we have an argument with someone. You have one view, they have another view. There's this back and forward, there's this destabilization. And eventually you come to a middle ground. You come to a state of bandha. When that middle ground is found, that energy is released. We've all felt that. We've all felt that when we come to an understanding with someone, we come to a sense of reason. We become reasonable. The opposites are seen. We see their side, they see our side. Boom. The energy is released and you feel lighter. You physically feel lighter. This, to me, is measurable in some way from in terms of physics, but we don't really need physics to understand this, because you understand this on an experienced level. We've all experienced this. It's just that we don't really put so much weight to it because it's not something we can necessarily measure and be certain about. Humans need certainty. The mind needs certainty. Reality is not certain. Reality is in flux. Reality is unstable in some ways. Yeah, we want stability, we want certainty. This is not the nature of reality, which is why we suffer. We're attached to the idea of things being certain and always stable, and that is not reality. Buddhism, yogic traditions and practice teach us the nature of reality. Everything is in flux. Everything is always changing. We suffer because we're delusional to that. We constantly need certainty. The quicker you can come to an acceptance of that, the happier you will be. And when these dakinis and dakas come in and out of your life, just be grateful for the experience. Be grateful for the time that you had. Be grateful for that desire, that longing, that connection that you had or have. And savor it. Be grateful for it. Be grateful that you had the opportunity to love someone like that. Be grateful for the opportunity for you to have that magnetic connection with someone and that you allowed yourself to go there. It's scary to be vulnerable, but it's one of the best feelings in the world. Allow that to happen. Don't repress that feeling. It's you're going against your true nature. I'm a firm believer that people suffer the most when they repress themselves. They repress what is naturally there. You have to bring awareness to what is really there. Whether you choose to engage with it or not is another thing. But bringing awareness to it and being honest with yourself about it is necessary. Now, this happens in dreams. Yeah, this happens in different states of consciousness. Dream yoga is a thing. This is a real thing. Yeah, there are practitioners who mostly just practice yoga in this way or meditation in this way. I've had countless resolutions in my life where this has impacted me at a very deep level from dreaming. Yeah, I have cleared conflict with people through my dreams. The deeper I've gone into loving kindness meditations, the fallout of that, or what happens from doing that is I dream a lot more, and in my dreams these different states of consciousness are engaged with, and conflict is resolved, and I wake up and I feel different. I physically feel different forever. Yeah, that's now changed. That emotional state is different. My body is different. Tension in my body is changed. Yeah, the human organism is so complex. In a reductionist way, we break it down into muscles, tendons, organs, nerve endings, and emotions are these sort of things that happen to us, but it's so complex. And like I say, I think understanding the subtle body and how we are on an energetic level allows us to think about this in a more holistic way, in a more real way, I would say, in a sense, because these are sensory things that you feel that are real. This is not fabrication. These are not illusionary. Dreams are real. Dreams are a real representation of the mind. Something gets changed within our dreams, yeah? Now, let's continue this actually. Now, where does all this come from? Yeah, this is one of probably my deepest meditations that is also probably one of the hardest to explain, and I don't think we can really explain it. What I think is interesting is that science and physics is trying to explain some of this, but in reality, it's very hard to explain this because trying to predict unpredictable things is very challenging. Let's go back to opposites again. If we think about aspects of the known universe, there's this concept of zero energy universe. This is a theory really, but I think that really it relates a lot to the concept of shunyata in Buddhism. I've done an episode specifically on shunyata, if you want to go and check that out. But this is really a little bit of an expansion of this that goes more into the subtle body. There's a very known saying in Buddhism that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. This is a very interesting thing to study. If we think about where things come from in the known universe, there is a common theory that the existence of the universe actually came from nothing. If we go back to opposite energies again, positive energy being matter, antimatter, light potentially, and its opposite being gravity. The balancing of those two, the equation of those two is zero if you include things like dark matter or black energy, depending on how you want to call this. But potentially everything in our known universe actually came from a state of nothingness. Now, this sounds ridiculous in a way. How can something come from nothing? But it's something that scientists are trying to explain to us from an energetic perspective. But for me, this made complete sense when I related this to my yogic studies. When we think about the mind and the nature of the mind, and if you go into deeper aspects of your consciousness and meditation, there's a point that gets reached of neutrality. Now, in Buddhism, everything is classed as interdependent. Nothing exists on its own, and I would say this is a true statement from observing myself, my mind, and life. This is also explained in aspects of physics, how things just come into creation, seemingly from nothing, from these empty spaces. From empty space, things just magically occur. And I think that predictively we try to explain this scientifically through mathematics, but really we're trying to make certain something that really isn't. We're trying to explain something that we don't really understand. But the reality is, things come into existence from a space of emptiness, from the space of nothingness. This is the same when you observe your mind. Yeah? When you observe your mind for long enough, you realize that thoughts, feelings, all of these things just popping come into existence seemingly from nothing. This is the nature of the mind, and I believe this is the nature of reality. This is the nature of the known universe. We don't understand this really on a conceptual level, but we observe it. We observe nothingness, which isn't really nothing. There's a lot going on in empty space. There's a lot going on in these different fields of space that we class as empty. there's a lot of potential energy in nothingness. When we bring our awareness to something and our consciousness gets involved, things magically come into existence. This is the nature of the mind. I believe Buddhism is explained this. I believe Buddhism is explained this at a very real level. Physics, quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement is another way of viewing this. But I think really, again, it's trying to predict certainty in something that is completely uncertain. But I think if you observe the mind and you observe nature long enough, this becomes intrinsically true. And I think this enables us to have a deeper understanding of ourselves so that we feel less pain and we suffer less when we understand the real nature of reality. We understand that everything is in flux, everything is changing all the time. And actually, when you observe the nature of reality through our awareness and the way that we engage with reality, the things that we focus on is what we experience. The things that you bring your attention to, the things that you bring your awareness to, creates your own reality and potentially can create your own suffering. This to me is a fundamental law in the sense that it's observable. And I think for anyone that struggles with depression and things of such, this helps massively. It also helps massively that some of us struggle with a strong senses of attachment and loss. When you understand how things are interdependent of each other, but are always changing. And I think that we suffer less when we understand that this really is how things are. Yeah, these aren't these fixed certain things. There is this void. There is this empty space. There is an empty space that is in existence. And we can visualize this in our mind. And we can bring awareness to how our thoughts and our emotions change instantly. Yeah, depending on what you think about, your emotional state can change instantly depending on what you focus on. And I think this is the nature of reality. I think it's interesting to observe this in the sense of shunyata and how we see empty space in our known universe. And there's all this potential energy for anything, but potentially there's all this potential energy for love and bliss and compassion. And the reason I'm talking about love, bliss and compassion, because for some reason that I don't really know why, but focusing on love and focusing on compassion takes you much deeper into these spaces. This is just a proven thing for myself. Understanding the opposites, understanding these energetic opposites, bringing awareness to these opposites, focusing on this empty space, cultivating love and bliss from this potential energy space takes your meditation practices much deeper. The stages I've gone to in my own meditation practices have always gone deeper from focusing on love and compassion, focusing on those things, desire, focusing on that connection with someone else, that desire, that magnetic pull towards someone else, to be in union with someone else, to be in union energetically with a sexual partner, or to take my mind and my consciousness into those spaces have always drawn me into much deeper realizations of my own consciousness and space and time and the expansion of the universe. It's a vehicle. I believe that it's ultimately a vehicle for your consciousness to see the true nature of reality. Now, when the mind gets involved, this changes things, which is why we have to learn how to train our mind, which is why I've spent a lot of time on these episodes talking about why yogic practices are mostly about mind control. Because when we have, anger, delusion, ignorance, pride, jealousy, the kind of things that we're taught to, the kind of poisons of the mind, these ultimately take us out of this state. And then we're much in this lower vibration, and then we suffer more, and we don't feel much bliss, and we don't feel much joy. And we start blocking things, we start blocking love. And we struggle. Now, I was going to do an episode to try to explain what happens when we go beyond these states. There's lots of different experienced meditation practitioners who've gone into various different states of their meditation practice. And it's quite difficult to explain in words, because we can all experience bliss and we can all experience love. And I think that I've tried to explain this a little bit in previous episodes, but what I've realized is that it's almost impossible to explain with words. And I think this is because aspects of our universe and aspects of our consciousness, the same way it's very difficult to explain love, is the English language, for example, is limited in that sense. Yeah, it's very difficult to explain these things in words. And I thought about writing a poem actually to explain or to express what these different states of consciousness feels like, and even that is quite difficult. Yeah, I've tried to explain it before, but I believe that focusing on love and compassion is ultimately what will take you into these deeper states, and the deeper states of awareness of who we are. I started writing a poem about this as a way to express this, and it felt incomplete, and I think I need to go back to that to try and express that. So I might try and do that at another time, because I think it's just very difficult to express these things in this way. But I think that if you're really on the spiritual path, in the sense that this was actually potentially going to be the subject of this podcast originally, was just how committed are you to this? Because lots of us go to yoga classes and we do asana and we do breath work and we do pranayama, and things start to feel different and we start to change the way we feel, and these are all positive things. But I think sometimes it's really good just to acknowledge like what we're actually doing. These are transcendental meditations, movement practices that I don't want to use the word serious, but these are changing us at a very deep level. And I think that at some point you have to start listening to your intuition more, and you have to start letting that guide you. I don't mean that you have to as in some sort of like I'm ordering you. I don't mean it in that way. But if you want to go deeper into these practices, you have to listen to your intuition. You have to start using your mind less, in a way, because your intuition is like your ultimate guide. Your gut feeling, the palpitations you feel in your heart, the bodily sensations that repel you or attract you to different things are your guide. Yeah, the mind is a different type of guide. It will think about things in a very different way, and that's important. Yeah, like financially, whatever kind of mind things that come involved. But you can choose to listen to your intuition, or you can choose not to, but at least you're aware of why you're choosing different things. I've often spoke about this on different podcasts, but this is an important part of how deep you want to go into these things. Because if you're listening to your intuition in your gut and your heart, you know that you're kind of in line with the universe. Again, think about this energetically. It's hard to get our heads around this, like what's guiding us? What are we drawn to? Ultimately, I believe that we're the happiest when we're in a state of bandha. if you are listening to your intuition, if you are observing these opposite poles and pushes and things that repel us, if you observe that and you live by that accordance, that becomes your compass. I've never experienced that to be a bad thing. I've never experienced that to lead to anger, violence, hatred, which there's too much of that in this world at the moment. I've never experienced that to lead me down that path. If your moral compass, I want to say morally, if your compass is finding that stability, that state of bandha, if you're allowing that to guide you, I believe that leads to love, peace and happiness. I believe that leads to bliss. I believe that leads to your flow state, finding out what you're naturally drawn to outside of the mind. This is also tricky to do, because we live in a very complex world where things are, imprinted and pushed onto us, and unfortunately, we're very much controlled in our lives these ways. I would say it's becoming more difficult to live intuitively with modern life. And I think that we're happier, I believe we're happier when we live more intuitively. I don't think you need to let every decision be guided by your intuition. I mean that we're more happy when we're more in accordance with bandha. We're more happy when we're more in accordance with this natural push and pull, and we live in a way where we're trying to find balance. We're trying to find that stability between opposite energies. And I think really we need to see our relationships as guides. We need to see the things that trigger us as teachers. And again, this specifically and most strongly happens with our opposites. And our opposites are often our romantic relationships, these dakas and dakinis. I think that this is an important thing to observe in what gets triggered within us, what we're trying to resolve from someone else. My meditations at Christmas went really deeply into this, of attraction and desire. What is it we're attracted to? What is the feeling that comes up when we go into that attraction and that desire? And when I did this at Christmas, a very negative feeling come up. My desire and attraction to something brought up something I didn't like. It brought up a feeling I didn't like, and I had to go into that, and I had a very uncomfortable few days of meditating on that. But at the end of it was a very deep realization about what I was trying to balance out. I don't think necessarily the details of this story are so important. It's more around the intention that we can learn a lot from our desires. We can learn a lot from the things we're attracted to. And usually there's something deeper within that. And as you probably know from this podcast, I'm generally interested in going to the root of things. I'm always, that fascinates me. And I think I've learned a lot about myself from going into the root of things and understanding what is it about that thing that I was attracted to. Why did this negative feeling come up? What was the association? And really, it's uncomfortable, really, sometimes to be vulnerable. And what negative feelings might come up from vulnerability? Why do we feel scared or jealous, or what brings up sort of different feelings for us? And I think that we can understand a deeper sensing of love and attachment when we go into those things. But really, maybe I might end on this, but I believe this could be a mantra, as in the way to live, but I believe that we shouldn't repress anything. I think humans are generally very repressed. I think we live in a society which tends to teach us to repress our feelings and emotions, and I mostly think this leads to blockages and resentment and different types of feelings that you could class as negative feelings. And I think that we're more happy when we're more aware of what is really there, and we don't try to block those things. But I think I might leave that there actually, because there's an episode I wanted to do, which was really, I was going to call it Beyond Bliss. And really it was going into the deeper aspects of meditation and these different states that we can get into. But I think I need to think about it a bit more and how I might express that on the podcast. Because like I say, it's quite difficult to express in words. And I think that I need to spend a little bit more time on how I might talk about this empty space, this space of shunyata, or going beyond that. Going beyond the deeper elements and the deeper stages of consciousness and what that feels like, or how we might connect with that. But I'm just going to check a few notes because there might be something here I missed. But yeah, I think I might leave it there. Okay, ciao.